Imagine this. It is April 1241. The sky over Central Europe is choked with smoke and ash, and the kind of silence hangs in the air that only appears before total destruction. Villages are already burning. Bells are no longer ringing. Roads are filled with refugees, broken carts, lost children, and men who haven't slept in days. And in the heart of Hungary, near a small, almost insignificant river called the Sajo, an entire kingdom is holding its breath, waiting for something it does not understand and cannot stop. History would later call it the Battle of Mohi. But for the people living through it, this was not history. This was the final moment before their world cracked open. Because this wasn't just another medieval battle. This wasn't knights clashing for honor or kings fighting for land. This was the moment when Europe itself came face to face with something faster, smarter, colder, and more lethal than anything it had ever seen. What if I told you that in one single night, the Mongols completely destroyed the main army of Hungary, opened the gates to Central Europe, and turned the kingdom of St. Stephen into a sea of ash? What if I told you that Europe didn't survive because it was strong, but because the Mongols simply stopped? This wasn't a victory. This was a warning. And its echo can still be heard centuries later. At the beginning of the 13th century, Europe thought it was safe. It believed in walls, in stone, in armored knights, in God's protection, and in the illusion that danger always came slowly. Castles were rising across the continent. Kings were busy with petty wars and political marriages. Nobles were fighting over land and titles. To them, the world ended somewhere far beyond the eastern forests. Beyond that, who cared? But far beyond those forests, beyond the Carpathian Mountains, beyond rivers they couldn't even pronounce, an empire without cities was expanding like a storm across the grasslands of Asia. No marble palaces, no cathedrals, no walls, just sky, horses, and war. The Mongols had already wiped Central Asia off the map. They had crushed Persia. They had erased the mighty cities of the Rus, destroying Kiev, Vladimir, and countless others. They didn't just win battles. They removed civilizations like chalk from a board. And now they were coming west. King Bela IV of Hungary heard the rumors. He had heard of armies that rode for days without stopping, of horsemen who could fire arrows while retreating, of cities that surrendered and were still burned to the ground. He listened to refugees from the east who spoke of endless riders and blackened skies. He did what he thought was right. He called his nobles, mobilized his knightly orders, summoned every warrior he could from across his kingdom. He even allowed the Cumans, steppe nomads fleeing the Mongols, to settle in Hungary, hoping they could teach him how to fight these invaders. But fear spread faster than preparation. The Hungarian nobles distrusted the Cumans. The people blamed them for bringing the Mongols closer. And eventually, in a wave of panic, the Cumans were attacked by Hungarian mobs. Their leader was murdered, and they fled. Just as the Mongols arrived, it was already too late. The Mongols did not rush. They sent scouts, silent riders who studied roads, bridges, rivers, and terrain. They didn't reveal their strength. They let fear do half the work. They allowed rumors to destroy morale before their soldiers arrived. And behind them was a commander not just of troops, but of strategy itself. Subutai, one of the greatest military minds in human history. A man who didn't see armies. He saw movements, patterns, possibilities. He didn't fight emotionally. He calculated. And Hungary was just another equation to solve. The Hungarian army took position near the Sajo River, close to the village of Mohi. They chose this place because it gave them a natural defensive line. A river in front, flat terrain around them, space for their heavy cavalry to operate. They built a fortified camp with wagons, forming a defensive ring, a medieval barrier they believed would protect them. Around 30,000 to 40,000 men gathered there. Knights in armor, infantry with spears and shields, crossbowmen ready on the defenses. It was the best army Hungary could offer, and they were convinced they were ready. Subutai allowed them that illusion. He allowed them to wait, to grow confident, to feel safe. He knew that fear plus false security makes a perfect trap. On the night of April 10th, 1241, the illusion began to crack. A Mongol force attacked the bridge over the Sajo River. Just a small force. Enough to be seen. Enough to draw attention. Enough to make the Hungarians think this was the main assault. The Hungarian troops rushed to defend the bridge, clashing with the Mongols in the darkness. And for a moment, the Europeans believed they were winning. They pushed them back. They felt relief. They felt pride. They thought they had held the line. But that attack was never meant to win. It was meant to distract. While the Hungarians focused on the bridge, Subutai moved his main army to a different crossing point. Under cover of darkness, they located a shallow section of the river. There, silently, they began constructing a temporary bridge. Not with clumsy fear, not with chaos, but with precision. While one part of the Hungarian army celebrated, another part of the Mongol army was already crossing the Sejo behind them. By the time the first light of morning broke through the fog, Mongol forces were on the Hungarian side of the river, undetected, unchallenged, in position. When the Hungarian commanders realized what had happened, panic spread through their ranks. They were now trapped between the river and the Mongol army. The fortified camp that was supposed to protect them became a cage. And then Subutai gave the signal. The Mongol army surged forward, not in disorder, but in structured waves. Fast, light, deadly. Arrows filled the sky. Not random volleys, but controlled, calculated storms aimed at commanders, banners, and key formations. Wherever Hungarian leadership showed itself, Mongol arrows followed. The Hungarian heavy cavalry charged, as European knights had done for centuries. But the Mongols did not meet them head-on. They didn't collide with strength. They dissolved. They retreated in perfect formation, drawing the knights farther from their positions, stretching their lines, separating units, breaking cohesion. The knights pursued, thinking they were winning. But each retreat was planned. Each movement led them deeper into chaos. The Mongols reappeared from the sides, from the rear, raining arrows into gaps, moving like a living storm. Then came fire. Weapons that Europe had rarely seen on a battlefield. Crude explosive devices. Fire arrows. Smoke and blasts tearing into the Hungarian camp. Wagons that had formed a defensive ring now became burning barricades. Horses screamed. Men tried to tear off armor that turned into ovens. Smoke blinded those still trying to fight. And inside the camp, tens of thousands of soldiers found themselves trapped in heat, fear, and confusion. What had begun as a battle became an execution. Hungarian formations collapsed. Leadership disintegrated. Soldiers tried to escape, but the terrain betrayed them. Swamps, riverbanks, mud. The Mongol cavalry pursued with relentless speed, hunting survivors across open ground. For every man who managed to flee, many more fell into the earth. King Bela barely escaped. His bodyguards fought to carry him away from the chaos. He survived. His army did not. By the end of the Battle of Mohi, the main Hungarian force was shattered. Tens of thousands lay dead. The defensive line of Central Europe was broken. The road to Vienna, to Central Europe, to the heart of the continent lay open. And the Mongols stood there, victorious, surrounded by death and smoke, with nothing in front of them except possibility. And this was only the beginning of what Mohi truly meant for Europe. When the sun rose after the Battle of Mohi, it didn't rise on a battlefield. It rose on a grave. The air reeked of smoke, blood, burned leather, and wet earth torn apart by hooves and steel. The Sejo River, once quiet and nameless, now carried bodies downstream, turning its waters dark, thick, and slow. The sounds of battle had faded, but they were replaced by something worse. Silence broken only by the crackling of fires and the weak cries of the wounded calling for help that would never come. For Hungary, this wasn't a defeat. It was a collapse. The spine of the kingdom had been snapped in a single night. King Bela fled west, barely alive, his kingdom disintegrating behind him like ash carried by the wind. And the Mongols didn't rush after him. They didn't need to, because the army of Hungary no longer existed. There was no force left to resist. The countryside was open. The towns were defenseless. The castles were isolated islands in a rising ocean of destruction. And the Mongols began to move through the land not like an army, but like a season. An unstoppable season of fire. Village after village fell. Some tried to resist. Most didn't stand a chance. The Mongols had no interest in knightly duels, in honor, or in European codes of war. If a town resisted, it was erased. If a town surrendered, sometimes it was spared. Sometimes it wasn't. There was no pattern the people could rely on, and that was the point. Uncertainty was also a weapon. Fear was a weapon. Rumors traveled faster than horse hooves. Each story, whether true or exaggerated, was another arrow fired into the heart of Europe. Entire regions of Hungary were depopulated within weeks. Fields were abandoned. Cities burned. Monasteries that had stood for centuries vanished. Chroniclers later described the land as empty, like after a biblical flood, except the water had been replaced by ashes and bones. Wolves and scavengers roamed through areas where thousands had lived only days before. Some places never recovered. Even today, historians can trace areas of Hungary that lost population on such a scale that it took generations to return to normal. All because of what started at Mohi. But the terror didn't stay in Hungary. Europe watched. From Poland, from Austria, from the Holy Roman Empire, reports arrived describing what had happened. Not just battlefield defeat, but annihilation. Nobles and kings across Central Europe suddenly realized something horrible. They had no plan for this. Their entire military system was built for slow wars, sieges, heavy cavalry charges, and predictable enemies. The Mongols were none of that. They were speed, adaptation, mobility, psychological collapse. In Vienna, panic spread. Fortifications were strengthened. Supplies were hoarded. In some regions, churches held constant prayers, not for victory, but for survival. Chroniclers wrote with shaking hands. Some believed it was the end of days, a punishment from God. Others believed the Mongols were demons from the east. In truth, they were neither. They were human. And that made it worse, because it meant they could not be prayed away. Batu Khan and Subutai had achieved what few commanders ever did. They had broken a kingdom and paralyzed a continent. The road into Western Europe lay open. No large army stood in their way. No coalition was ready. No strategy existed to stop them. If they had continued, history itself could have changed completely. But then something strange happened. They stopped. Not because they were defeated. Not because they were weak. Not because Europe suddenly grew strong. They stopped because far away, on the other side of the world, a Mongol great Khan had died. And according to Mongol law and tradition, the leading princes needed to return east to participate in the election of the new great Khan. Power, for them, mattered more than conquest. Politics interrupted apocalypse. So instead of riding west into Germany, France, and Italy, the Mongol forces slowly began pulling back. And Europe breathed again. Not because it had won, but because its executioner had other priorities. This confused European chroniclers for centuries. They would tell the story of how God intervened, how heaven spared them, how the Christian world was saved by divine will. But the truth was colder, more random, more terrifying. Europe survived because of a power struggle thousands of kilometers away, in a land most Europeans had never heard of. And Hungary? Hungary had to live with the consequences. The kingdom was in ruins, its population decimated, its farmlands abandoned, its confidence destroyed. King Bela returned not as a triumphant ruler, but as a man trying to rebuild bones. He began constructing stone castles across the land, replacing weak wooden fortifications with strongholds, because he knew something now that he had not known before. He knew that the Mongols could return, and that if they did, Hungary might not survive twice. The Battle of Mohi became more than a massacre. It became a lesson carved into blood, a reminder that speed beats armor, intelligence beats bravery, strategy beats numbers. It forced European military thinking to change. Slowly, painfully, but permanently. Yet the most terrifying part of this story is not what happened at Mohi. Not even what happened to Hungary afterward. It's what didn't happen. Because the real haunting question stays unanswered. What if the Mongols had not turned back? What if they had continued west? What if Vienna fell? What if Rome fell? What if Paris fell? What would Europe even be? And that is where the true shadow of Mohi lies. Not in the deaths, not in the burning cities, but in the future that almost happened and then vanished. By the time the Mongols retreated eastward, the landscape of Central Europe had changed forever. Hungary was a ruin. Forests had reclaimed the fields. Rivers carried the echoes of screams. Yet the fear spread farther than the flames. Neighboring kingdoms realized they were exposed. Poland trembled. Bohemia shivered. Even distant German principalities could feel the shadow. Europe had been shown its weakness, and it would never forget. But what Europe did not see, what few historians emphasize, is how precise, calculated, and horrifyingly intelligent the Mongol tactics truly were at Mohi. They were not just skilled horsemen or merciless killers. They were strategic architects of terror. Subutai had designed the battle like a chessboard, each piece moving with intent. He didn't just attack. He deconstructed the Hungarian army before it even realized it had been attacked. Using feigned retreats, Mongol riders drew the knights out, stretching formations, breaking cohesion. Hungarian cavalry, trained for frontal assaults and direct clashes, found themselves trapped in an impossible geometry of movement. And every time they tried to regroup, the Mongols appeared from unexpected directions, rear, flank, or riverbank, turning every movement into a trap. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. Panic was an ally. Chaos was a weapon. Subutai understood that fear multiplied casualties faster than steel. The Mongols also demonstrated primitive but deadly fire technology that Europeans rarely encountered on battlefields. Fire arrows, early explosives, and incendiary devices that turned the Hungarian defensive camp into a furnace. Wagons became ovens. Armor became a death trap in the blazing heat. Smoke and chaos forced soldiers to flee blindly into riverbanks or open plains, where Mongol cavalry hunted them with devastating precision. Each death, each panic-stricken retreat, each collapse of a formation was orchestrated like notes in a symphony of destruction. And yet, for all their skill, Europe survived. Not because of courage, not because of preparation, but because the Mongols chose to withdraw. The death of the Great Khan far to the east forced Batu Khan and Subutai to turn their forces back. It was almost random. History, at that moment, balanced on the tip of a sword, and a faraway political obligation saved an entire continent. Europe's survival was luck, pure and terrifying. But the psychological aftermath was even more profound than the physical destruction. European armies began to rethink everything. Heavy cavalry, once considered invincible, was no longer sacred. Knights realized that discipline and massed armor could be circumvented by mobility, intelligence, and fire. Fortifications were rebuilt not only as protection against sieges but as sanctuaries against lightning-fast raids. Military strategy began a transformation that would take decades to mature, all seeded by the lessons of Mohi. Meanwhile, rumors of the Mongol threat mutated into legend. Chroniclers wrote stories mixing fact and myth. Entire cities wiped out in a night, towers of skulls, rivers running red. These tales traveled faster than armies ever could. The Mongol shadow stretched across Europe, not by presence, but by imagination. Fear became a force multiplier. The Western kingdoms began to prepare, even for a threat that might never return. Armies were mustered differently, alliances formed differently, castles built stronger, borders policed more carefully. Mohi was a disaster, but it became the blueprint for European survival in the centuries to come. Yet, for all the lessons, one question lingered in the minds of kings and commoners alike. What if the Mongols had continued west? If Mohi had been the first domino and not the last? If Vienna had fallen? If the Rhine had been crossed? If Paris had faced the steppe riders? Europe might have been a very different place. Languages, borders, religions, perhaps even civilization itself, might have been unrecognizable. The fear of what could have been haunted every European leader who survived, echoing silently through strategy meetings, councils of war, and midnight prayers. Mohi also revealed a fundamental truth about human perception. Europe had underestimated the power of intelligence over strength, of speed over armor, of strategy over pride. The Mongols had studied their enemy, manipulated the environment, and exploited human psychology with almost inhuman precision. Their victory was not just in the battlefield, but in demonstrating a new form of warfare that Europe had never faced. And though the Mongols withdrew, the seeds of fear, respect, and strategic re-evaluation remained. So when historians look back, Mohi is remembered as a battle, a decisive, catastrophic defeat for Hungary. But it is more than that. It is a warning about hubris, about underestimating speed and strategy, about how fragile even the mightiest armies can be in the face of the right mind with the right plan. The Mongols didn't just fight with swords, they fought with anticipation, with deception, and with terror. They taught Europe, unwillingly and brutally, that the old ways were insufficient, that the world beyond the forests and mountains was faster, smarter, and unrelenting. And this is where Mohi's true story lives, not in the numbers of dead, not in the burned villages, but in the shadow it cast over the future of Europe, a shadow that would guide kings, generals, and soldiers for generations to come, shaping the very definition of warfare. Europe survived that spring of 1241 not by strength, but by a combination of misfortune, strategy, and cosmic coincidence. Yet the memory of Mohi remained, whispered through centuries, a chilling reminder that the edge of the known world could vanish overnight, leaving only smoke, blood, and the terrifying efficiency of an enemy unlike any other. Europe had never faced anything like it. Spring of 1223, The plains near the Kalka River became the stage for a confrontation that would echo through history. On one side, the proud princes of Rus, armored knights, seasoned warriors, and their Cuman allies, gathered with confidence, believing they could halt the Mongol tide. On the other, a force unlike any Europe had ever seen. Subutai and Jebe leading tens of thousands of Mongol horsemen, masters of speed, strategy, and psychological warfare. As dawn broke, the river shimmered, seemingly calm, but beneath it, a storm of steel and blood was brewing. Feints, ambushes, and deadly tactics would turn the battlefield into a trap for the unprepared. Heavy cavalry charged, arrows rained, and the Mongols retreated, only to lure their enemies deeper into annihilation. By the end of the day, thousands would lie dead, the once united Rus forces shattered, and the Mongol legend solidified forever. It was the spring of 1223, a time when the world as Europe knew it was on the brink of a violent awakening. Beyond the vast steppes of Eurasia, a storm was gathering, an unstoppable force of warriors whose name would echo through the annals of history, the Mongols. Led by the legendary generals Subutai and Jebe, their army had been marching west, their reputation preceding them. Tales of unimaginable speed, ruthless efficiency, and merciless slaughter had reached the ears of princes and warriors alike. Yet, in the forests and plains near the Kalka River, the European princes believed they could halt this storm. The Rus principalities, fragmented and proud, had struggled for decades with internal rivalries. Princes from Kiev, Chernihiv, Galicia, and others were more accustomed to fighting each other than a foreign enemy. Still, the threat posed by the Mongols was undeniable. In response, a coalition was hastily formed, bringing together a force of Rus warriors and their allies from the Cumans, nomadic horsemen who knew the Mongols' ways but were wary of their unpredictability. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the mettle of the Slavic world and the tactical genius of the Mongols. The European army, numbering perhaps 18,000 to 20,000 men, was a mixture of heavy cavalry, foot soldiers, and Cuman light cavalry. They carried banners of various principalities, each asserting its authority, each commander determined to prove his valor. Yet, this diversity was also a weakness. There was no single leader who commanded unquestioned authority. Coordination would be difficult, and the Mongols were masters of exploiting such vulnerabilities. On the other side of the river, the Mongol army moved like a shadow. Perhaps 20,000 strong, they were organized, disciplined, and cohesive. Every unit had a role, every soldier trained to follow orders without hesitation. Their strategy relied not on brute force alone, but on psychological warfare, deception, and unmatched mobility. Scouts had already surveyed the terrain, and their knowledge of the Rus tendencies would prove decisive. As dawn broke on the day of battle, a strange tension hung in the air. Birds were silent, and even the river seemed to hold its breath. The Rus army positioned itself near the Kalka River, hoping to use the waterway as a defensive barrier. The Mongols, however, did not simply charge. Instead, they executed a series of feints, drawing the Rus forces into traps with calculated provocations. Light cavalry units appeared, disappeared, and reappeared, striking at the flanks, retreating, and retreating again. The Rus commanders, frustrated by the elusive enemy, attempted to force a confrontation, unaware that each move played into the Mongols' hands. The initial clash was small but telling. Cuman scouts skirmished with Mongol detachments, testing reactions. Each side learned of the other's strengths and weaknesses, but the Mongols' discipline was unmatched. They could endure feigned retreats, lure opponents into ambushes, and regroup with astonishing speed. By the time the Rus main army was fully engaged, the Mongols had already set the stage for disaster. The Rus heavy cavalry, armored and formidable, charged with the intent to break the Mongol lines. The impact was powerful, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Yet, the Mongols, trained in mobility and archery, did not meet the charge head-on. Instead, they drew the Europeans into positions where they were vulnerable to encirclement. Horse archers rained arrows upon the advancing cavalry, targeting horses and riders alike. Panic began to spread. Horses were cut down, riders fell, and the cohesion of the Rus army began to crumble. At this moment, the Mongols employed one of their most infamous tactics, the feigned retreat. Seeing the Rus forces falter, the Mongols began to withdraw in apparent disorder. Many of the Rus commanders, believing victory was within their grasp, pursued aggressively. They abandoned careful formation, chasing the retreating enemy across the open steppe. This pursuit would become their undoing. As the Rus cavalry moved further from their support units, the Mongols revealed their true strategy. Hidden detachments attacked from the flanks and rear, cutting off escape routes. The river that had once seemed a protective barrier now became a deadly obstacle, as soldiers tried to flee and were driven back into the waters. What had begun as a skirmish escalated into a massacre. The Mongols' coordination and ruthlessness turned the battlefield into a nightmare from which few would escape unscathed. The Cumans, allies of the Rus, fared no better. Despite their knowledge of steppe warfare, they were overwhelmed by the Mongols' cunning. Some attempted to negotiate or flee, but the Mongols pursued relentlessly. Messages sent back to the Rus princes only confirmed the grim reality. This was not a mere battle, it was annihilation. Every attempt to regroup was met with precise, calculated strikes. The Mongols struck where the Rus least expected, forcing them into constant defensive maneuvers and eroding their morale. As hours passed, the Rus army disintegrated. The Mongols, patient and disciplined, allowed panic to multiply. Commanders were killed or captured, and soldiers scattered. The riverbank was littered with the fallen, the screams of the wounded echoing across the plains. By nightfall, the once proud coalition of Rus forces had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Only small groups managed to escape, fleeing in terror to warn others of the disaster that had unfolded. The Battle of the Kalka River was more than a defeat, it was a turning point. It demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of Mongol strategy and the vulnerability of disunited European forces. For the Rus principalities, it was a lesson written in blood. Unity and coordination were essential against an enemy who understood the art of war like no other. The Mongols, meanwhile, continued their advance westward, their reputation for invincibility cemented in the minds of those who had survived. Yet, even in the midst of this catastrophe, the seeds of legend were sown. The tales of bravery, cunning, and the sheer scale of the battle would be recounted for generations. The Kalka River became synonymous not only with destruction but with the harsh realities of medieval warfare, where strategy, discipline, and psychological warfare could triumph over numbers and valor. This was a battle that Europe would not forget, a shadow that would loom over its rulers, soldiers, and historians for decades to come. By mid-morning, the battlefield near the Kalka River had transformed into chaos. Dust rose from the steppe, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the clamor of metal on metal. The Rus forces, confident in their numbers and heavy cavalry, had overextended themselves in pursuit of the retreating Mongols. Every advance they made seemed bold, yet with each step, they were marching deeper into a trap meticulously orchestrated by Subutai and Jebe. The Mongol generals had anticipated exactly this outcome. Using a combination of reconnaissance, feigned weakness, and relentless discipline, they had drawn the Rus forces away from their defensive positions. As the European knights pushed forward, they became increasingly isolated. Heavy armor, once an advantage, now slowed their movements and made them prime targets for the Mongols' composite bows. Horsemen fell not only to arrows but also to clever ambushes laid along the uneven terrain near the riverbank. As the first panic began to spread, the Mongols executed their next phase, the encirclement. Detachments hidden in the trees, behind ridges, and across the river appeared almost simultaneously from all sides. The Rus commanders, overwhelmed by the sudden emergence of enemies in their rear, struggled to organize a coherent defense. Attempts to rally the troops were met with confusion and mounting terror. Soldiers found themselves cut off from comrades, their retreat blocked by both the river and the relentless Mongol assault. The Cumans, despite their experience as nomadic warriors familiar with Mongol tactics, were now fighting for survival rather than strategy. Many attempted to retreat toward the steppe, hoping to regroup with other allies, but the Mongol horsemen pursued them relentlessly. Those who slowed down were quickly overtaken. Those who tried to cross the river found it clogged with bodies, drowning horses, and debris. The Mongols' mastery of the battlefield ensured that escape was nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the Rus heavy cavalry launched repeated charges, desperate to break the Mongol lines. Each charge was met with disciplined resistance. Mongol horse archers fired volleys while retreating in a controlled pattern, leading the knights into pre-planned kill zones. Every attempt at aggressive action played directly into the Mongol strategy. By exploiting the Rus pride and overconfidence, the Mongols turned bravery into vulnerability. One by one, the Rus commanders fell. Some were struck down in personal combat, their swords and shields no match for the speed and agility of the Mongol horsemen. Others were captured, forced to witness the massacre of their men before being executed or sent as prisoners to spread fear. The battlefield, once dotted with banners of different principalities, now looked like a graveyard of shattered alliances. Horses, armor, and bodies clogged the open fields, a stark testament to the Mongols' tactical superiority. By afternoon, the full scale of the disaster became evident. The Mongols, far from reckless, maintained strict discipline, conserving energy and targeting weaknesses with precision. Every retreat, every sudden withdrawal, was designed to create maximum disarray. The Rus soldiers, exhausted and demoralized, could no longer maintain formation. Some abandoned their weapons in terror. Others attempted to flee across the river only to be cut down or drown in its turbulent waters. One of the most chilling aspects of the Mongol approach was their psychological warfare. They understood fear as a weapon. Feigned retreats, sudden encirclements, and selective displays of brutality made it clear to the Rus that resistance would be futile. Panic spread like wildfire. Men who had trained for years, who had fought countless skirmishes, now found themselves paralyzed by the overwhelming coordination of their enemy. Courage, once a shield, became a liability. Amid this devastation, the Mongols continued to press the advantage. Horse archers circled the battlefield, striking isolated groups and cutting off any chance of regrouping. Those who had survived the initial onslaught were now systematically hunted down. The river, once a defensive ally, had become a trap. Many who tried to swim to safety were dragged under or struck down midstream. The Mongols, understanding the terrain intimately, manipulated it with deadly effect. By evening, the Rus coalition had been utterly destroyed. Tens of thousands lay dead, a staggering loss for the principalities of Rus. The Mongols, though victorious, had suffered minimal casualties, their forces intact and disciplined. The magnitude of the defeat sent shockwaves throughout Eastern Europe. News of the massacre at the Kalka River traveled quickly, spreading fear among distant rulers who now faced the looming Mongol threat. The battle left more than physical scars. For the Rus principalities, it was a profound psychological blow. Alliances had fractured under pressure, trust between leaders had eroded, and the sense of invincibility that had characterized European knights was shattered. The Mongols had not merely won, they had demonstrated the futility of disunity, the consequences of underestimating an enemy who combined intelligence, discipline, and ruthlessness with a mastery of speed and mobility. In the aftermath, Subutai and Jebe did not linger. They withdrew, leaving the Rus lands in devastation but alive enough to spread the tale. The survivors would recount the horrors: rivers clogged with bodies, comrades cut down before their eyes, and the terrifying precision of the Mongol army. The Kalka River became a symbol, a warning to all of Europe that the Mongols were not invincible by chance, but by design. The lessons of the Kalka River would echo for decades. Future encounters with Mongol forces would see some princes learning from the mistakes of 1223. But the memory of that day remained vivid, a stark reminder of what happens when pride, overconfidence, and disunity meet unparalleled military genius. The Mongols, disciplined and efficient, had proven that victory did not rely on sheer numbers alone. It relied on strategy, psychological manipulation, and the relentless exploitation of weakness. This was a battle that changed the course of Eastern European history. It was a day when the steppe struck Europe with unmatched ferocity, leaving death, fear, and legend in its wake. Every maneuver, every feigned retreat, every calculated arrow reinforced a terrifying reality. The Mongols were a force unlike any the continent had seen, and the Kalka River was their first lesson for Europe, one written in blood and unforgotten for generations. The dust of the Kalka River finally settled, but its echoes would reverberate for generations. The battlefield, once a scene of chaos and blood, became a symbol of both the Mongols' brilliance and the Rus' failure to unify. For historians, chroniclers, and survivors alike, the events of that day were not merely a story of defeat. They were a masterclass in strategy, discipline, and the brutal realities of medieval warfare. One of the most striking lessons of the Kalka River was the importance of unity. The Rus coalition, though numerically significant, suffered from internal divisions. Princes from Kiev, Chernihiv, Galicia, and other principalities had joined forces out of necessity, yet rivalries and mistrust hampered coordination. Orders were unclear, and disagreements among commanders slowed critical decisions. By contrast, the Mongols were singular in purpose. Subutai and Jebe commanded with absolute authority, each unit knowing its role, each soldier trained to execute it flawlessly. In battle, the difference was devastating. Coordination triumphed over raw bravery, and discipline over numbers. The Mongols' mastery of psychological warfare was equally formidable. Their feigned retreats, sudden encirclements, and selective brutality created fear that spread faster than arrows could fly. Panic became a weapon, eroding the Rus army's cohesion even before the Mongols struck decisively. Survivors would recount not just the physical horrors but the psychological torment, witnessing comrades cut down, realizing escape was impossible, and understanding that every movement was anticipated by a cunning enemy. This mastery of fear ensured that even experienced warriors could be overwhelmed. Subutai and Jeeb's tactical genius shone through every maneuver. By luring the Rus cavalry into overextension, the Mongols exploited predictable behavior. Heavy knights, confident in their strength, became vulnerable to the mobility and precision of horse archers. Encirclements were executed with exacting timing, while hidden detachments cut off escape routes. Every move was calculated to maximize the enemy's losses while minimizing their own. What appeared to European eyes as chaos was, in fact, an intricate and disciplined strategy. Yet, the Rus forces were not without moments of valor. Individual knights and Cuman warriors fought with courage and skill, striking Mongol detachments, covering retreats, and attempting to regroup scattered units. Some commanders demonstrated remarkable leadership under pressure, rallying men despite overwhelming odds. Their bravery, however, could not overcome the systematic precision of the Mongol army. The lesson was clear. Heroism alone was insufficient against an enemy who wielded strategy and discipline as effectively as any weapon. The aftermath of the battle reshaped the political and military landscape of Eastern Europe. The Rus principalities were left weakened, their forces decimated, and their sense of security shattered. Alliances were strained, and the fear of further Mongol incursions would dominate strategic thinking for decades. The Mongols themselves, though moving further west, left a legacy of terror and respect. Stories of the Kalka River spread quickly, warning neighboring lands of the consequences of underestimating the steppe warriors. The battle also had long-term implications for military doctrine. Future European armies took note of the Mongols' use of mobility, intelligence, and psychological warfare. Heavy cavalry, while powerful, was no longer an automatic guarantee of victory. Coordination between units, reconnaissance, and flexible tactics became increasingly valued. In many ways, the Kalka River served as a precursor to the evolution of medieval warfare, illustrating the effectiveness of strategy over brute force. Legends of the battle persisted, passed down through chronicles, oral histories, and songs. The Kalka River was remembered not merely as a site of death but as a turning point, a day when Europe faced a foe unlike any other, when pride, overconfidence, and disunity met with unprecedented tactical genius. Survivors told of rivers clogged with bodies, of commanders executed or humiliated, and of the Mongols' eerie ability to anticipate every move. These stories became cautionary tales, teaching future generations the importance of preparation, unity, and respect for one's enemy. For the Mongols, the victory reinforced their reputation as an unstoppable force. Subutai and Jeeb's campaigns demonstrated that success relied on intelligence, speed, and psychological insight as much as on strength. Their ability to strike decisively, withdraw strategically, and manipulate the battlefield became a model for military planners and generals across Eurasia. The Kalka River was a testament to their ingenuity, a demonstration that warfare was as much about mind as muscle. In the years that followed, the Rus principalities slowly recovered, but the shadow of the Kalka River lingered. Fortifications were strengthened, alliances re-examined, and lessons learned from the Mongol tactics began to influence the conduct of war. The battle's psychological impact, fear of the Mongols' return, awareness of disunity's dangers, and recognition of the power of disciplined strategy shaped the region's political and military thinking for generations. Ultimately, the Battle of the Kalka River was a defining moment in medieval history. It was a day when courage collided with strategy, when bravery met meticulous planning, and when disunity met the relentless precision of a disciplined enemy. The lessons learned were stark and enduring. Unity, coordination, and respect for an adversary's ingenuity are often as critical as valor itself. The Mongols' triumph at the Kalka River would remain a benchmark for centuries, a testament to the devastating power of strategy and psychological mastery in warfare. And so, the Kalka River remains etched in history, a river of blood, a battlefield of legends, and a symbol of the lessons that survive long after the clash of swords has ended. It is a reminder that in war, as in life, preparation, insight, and discipline can tip the scales between survival and annihilation, between legend and oblivion.